We are doing section 4.5, which is graphing sine and cosine functions today. Okay, so here's the graph of the basic y equals sine of x sine function. So what we need to look at are a couple of things. The first thing is the period. Now I know we talked earlier about how the period of a sine function and cosine function is 2 pi, and let me show you what that looks like on its graph. That's when it starts to repeat itself. So 2 pi goes from here to here. And as you can see, after 2 pi, it starts to repeat itself and looks the same as it did starting at 0. And the range of a sine function, that would be the y values, is between -1 and 1 of the y's. Okay, now we're going to go down to the cosine function, take a look at that one. It looks very similar. The difference, if you want to compare them side by side, I guess we can't, but the sine function starts at 0, goes up to a max, goes to an intercept, goes down to a minimum, and back up to the intercept, whereas the cosine function starts at the max and ends at the max. However, we can say that the period is still 2 pi. That's when it starts to repeat itself. And the range is still -1 to 1. So a lot of similarities in the sine and cosine functions. What we need to recognize every time we graph a sine or cosine function is a set of points called the key points. Now those include the intercepts, the maxes, and the mins. So sine, they both have 5 key points. And it's all the main points in one period of the function. So if I point out all the key points, these are what you'll be graphing when you graph any trig function, is the 5 key points. So sine starts at an intercept of 0, 0, goes up to the max, which occurs at pi over 2, the max is 1, goes to another intercept, goes down to the minimum of -1, and lastly ends at an intercept. Okay, so whenever we graph any sine function at all, whether it's the basic one or it has transformations, we always need to graph those 5 key points. So the 5 key points for the cosine function then, cosine function starts at the max, goes down to an intercept, down to a minimum, intercept, and ends at a max since it started at a max. Now, unfortunately, the best way is just to memorize what these basic sine and cosine functions look like, so you can remember if sine starts at an intercept, starts at a max, starts at a min. So you're recognizing that the sine function starts at an intercept and ends at an intercept, and you have to remember that general shape in order to remember the order of the 5 key points. Okay, so we're going to be using those 5 key points to sketch a sine curve. And now this sine curve is a little bit different than the curve, I mean, it just has a 2 in front, but it is different than the regular sine curve. So our 5 key points of any sine curve starts at an intercept, going up to a max, middle's an intercept, goes down to a min, ends at an intercept. Okay, so those are always what's going to happen here. And I also know what the x values are of all my 5 key points because there hasn't been any transformations. All that 2 does in front is changes the height. So I know that this point will 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. So obviously the intercepts are all going to be zeros. That part's easy. The max then, all that 2 is doing is changing the height, like I said, so that max is going to be 2 instead of 1 like it was before, which makes the minimum -2. So now I'll go ahead and sketch these. And all we need to do is sketch one period. So that should do it right there. Those were the 5 key points, and that's the graph. Amplitude and period of sine and cosine curves. So now we're going to have all different kinds of transformations occurring on our sine and cosine curves. So our equations would be d plus a sine of bx minus c and y equals d plus a cosine of bx minus c, where the a, b, c, and d are all constants. So like I said before, that number that's right in front of your sine or cosine curve is called the amplitude, which is how tall our graph is. That's the vertical stretch or shrink. So the difference then on A and B here, the only difference is that our max and mins are going to be different. So in the basic cosine curve, our height is 1 both directions. So remembering that cosine, 5 key points in general, is max, intercept, min, intercept, max. That's from 0 to 2 pi, meaning pi over 2 and 3 pi over 2 are always going to be, we'll do this one in red. The pi over 2 and 3 pi over 2 will always be intercepts of both of these graphs. The only difference then is the height. So our max starts at 1/2 for the first graph, goes down to -1/2 in the middle, and back up to 1/2 at the end where the max is. Okay, so that's what that one looks like. And same thing for the second one, we'll do that one in blue. The only difference is the height is 3 instead of 1/2. Let's go down a little bit. And that's what that would look like. All right, so we've talked about this a few times already, that the period is normally 2 pi. But if there's a b or any number in front of your x in your function, so the number right in front of the x is your b, to find the period of that function, you would do 2 pi divided by b. And that's going to change the length of your graph, and so not the height necessarily, but the length. So normally a period is 2 pi, and when we think about just sine of x, what number is in front of the x on that? Is just a 1, so 2 pi divided by 1 is 2 pi, and that's why the period is 2 pi for the sine and cosine functions. But here we now have sine of x over 2. So that's actually the same thing as saying sine of 1/2 x. And I think putting it in that form helps us to figure out what the b is, because remember the b is the number right in front of the x. So now we can say that b is 1/2, and to find the period, we need to do 2 pi divided by the b, which is 1/2. So our period is 4 pi. So in fact, this is not going to fit on this graph. So we're going to change this and say that this is our scale to make it fit here. Okay. All right, so now we have to pick out our 5 key points. We have a sine function, which means it starts at, let's do our x's on top here. Starts at an intercept and ends at an intercept for any sine function. So the middle is also an intercept. And the regular sine function goes up to a max first. So our starting point is still 0, and our ending point this time is 4 pi. 4 pi because that is our period. So now we need to chop this into 4 equal groups. Before, when there's no transformations, it's really easy because the groups are always the same. But I think the easiest way to figure out your 4 equal groups of x values is to just keep dividing it in half. So what I would do, I have the beginning, I have the ending. I would find the middle point next because it would be the average of 0 and 2 and 4 pi. So I would add them together and divide by 2, and I would get 2 pi in the middle. And then do the same thing with the first half and the second half. Between 0 and 2 pi, halfway is pi, and 3 pi for the second half. Now this one was really easy to figure out, but sometimes you're actually going to have to go through and calculate the average. Okay, all the intercept are going to be 0. The max, there was no number in front, I don't believe, nope. So the height's still going to be 1. So your max is 1, your minimum is -1. And I'm going to go ahead and graph that. Okay, and that's our graph. I'm going to take a small pause in the lessons here to make sure we can get everything fit onto these videos. So the second half of section 5 will be in the next video.